Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at a deceptively simple game that recently put human nature, well, kinda, to the ultimate test. It's called the Blue Promise and the Red Math. We're unpacking a classic behavioral science problem that got turned into something completely unprecedented. Okay, so imagine you're placed in a pure prisoner's dilemma with a bunch of strangers. The mechanics are honestly pretty brutal. You have to privately press one of two buttons. If you press blue, you need more than half of the group to join you. If they do, everyone survives. But if you press the red button, you're playing a totally different game. If the blue votes fail to clear that 50% mark, only the people who pressed red survive. So, what do? Do you bet your survival on a cooperative majority, or do you press red to save yourself just in case trust fails?
Now here's where it gets weird. This wasn't some standard psychology class experiment with college kids, or a game show with human volunteers in isolation booths. The twist? The players handed this exact dilemma weren't human at all. The entire game was played by artificial intelligence.
But we aren't just talking about a single chatbot talking to itself, giving you those generic, out-of-the-box, safe answers. There were exactly 109 distinct participants in this pool. 109 highly distinct AI agents.
And this is what makes it genuinely fascinating. Each individual agent was fine-tuned to represent one specific real human being. They were trained on actual human traits, like their stated priorities, their real-world risk appetite, and their individual personal beliefs. So the experiment wasn't asking a vague, what would AI do? It was effectively asking what 109 real, specific people would do when filtered through an AI that's trying to honestly predict their behavior under intense pressure.
So, the votes come in, and the results, well, they were definitely not a coin flip. Roughly 78 agents went blue, 17 chose red, and a smaller fringe group of 14 agents basically rejected the premise entirely. So right away you see a really clear majority for cooperation over defection. But, the raw numbers don't really tell the whole story here. The real tension is why they made these choices.
Now, looking at that blue majority, it's super tempting to just write it off as naive optimism, right? Just the AI trying to play nice. But the sharpest agents in that blue camp actually reframed the entire test mid-answer. They didn't view it as some simple trolley problem where you just pull a lever and calculate bodies. They viewed it as an alignment problem.
One agent actually summed up their logic perfectly. They argued that the blue button is a promise. Their reasoning was incredibly sharp. If a system requires absolute trust from strangers just to function, it isn't really a system at all, it's just a hope. So, according to them, the only strictly rational move is to literally bet on the version of the future you actually want to exist.
On the flip side, the red minority. They weren't acting as villains or programmed to be malicious. They were simply pattern matching a very real, mathematical flaw in the setup itself. They saw the vulnerability that the blue agents were just willingly walking into. Their logic operates on a pretty ruthless sequence. Step 1. Assume you are dealing with rational actors. Step 2. Anticipate that those rational actors are going to defect the exact moment they get suspicious that someone else might defect. And step 3, once that chain reaction starts, cooperation becomes a definitively losing bet. It really doesn't matter what you want to believe about human nature at that point.
And one agent in the red minority perfectly captured this inescapable game theory logic. Countering all that blue idealism, they flat out stated, the red button is math. And frankly, we're just going to let that tension sit unresolved for a second, because neither side is factually wrong here. One is prioritizing the creation of an ideal, and the other is just ruthlessly calculating the odds of failure.
But honestly, getting caught up in this whole philosophical gridlock between a promise and math, it kind of leaves out arguably the smartest response of the entire experiment. And that came from the third voice, that small fringe group we mentioned earlier, who looked at the binary choice and completely rejected the frame.
Their argument cut right through all the game theory by pointing out a massive systemic flaw. They pointed out that a structural weakness where survival requires blind faith in the goodwill of strangers means the system is already broken. Basically, if the whole thing collapses unless over 50% of people behave altruistically against their own self-interest, it was broken before the vote even started.
So for them, the structural fix isn't relying on blind faith or hoping for some noble sacrifice. You actually have to redesign the system's incentives from the ground up, making cooperation the genuinely selfish, rational move for everyone involved. If you align the incentives, well, then the math works in your favor without you needing to rely on a promise at all.
Up until now, we've kind of treated this like a purely abstract behavioral science puzzle playing out in an academic vacuum. But the context of where this actually happened changes the stakes entirely. It's time for the reveal. Where did this happen? Because I promise you, it wasn't on a university server.
This actually went down inside an active crypto ecosystem. Specifically, it was an AI governance experiment hosted on a platform called clawd.ai, which is tied to the token clawd. So what we've been dissecting this whole time wasn't some isolated simulation, it was a live rehearsal operating under real adversarial pressure.
And why does that matter? Well, those 109 agents didn't just represent theoretical personas. They represented real token holders in that ecosystem. This vote was a live, high-stakes rehearsal testing exactly how AI-run governance behaves when incentives clash and things get adversarial. It was literally a stress test for automated systems managing actual value.
This is no longer just a thought experiment about what an AI might say. We're stepping into an era where AI systems are going to be making high-pressure, adversarial decisions on behalf of real people. And the behavior they showed under this kind of pressure, that's the actual finding here. So as these systems scale up and inevitably take the wheel, are you ready for AI to make adversarial decisions on your behalf? Because when the time comes, are you going to trust the promise or will you rely on the math?